They're blaring their horns and blocking the roads leading up to Canada's Parliament. As many as 10,000 truckers, construction workers and others have been stacking out in Ottawa to protest against the government's vaccine mandate. Lawmakers have made it mandatory for anyone crossing the Canada-US border to be inoculated for COVID-19. These demonstrators say that's a violation of their rights.
When they froze our economy, they didn't freeze any loans. There was no legislature that caused them to freeze any of our loans, and they didn't lower our taxes respectively. So people are losing their homes, they're losing their businesses, they have no income, and they're being extorted to get the vaccine in order to just stay employed so they don't lose their houses.
You can't get food, you can't get water, you gotta have a mask. If you don't have your mask, you can't go into stores, you can't do anything, and just like things to be normal again.
The masks don't make sense. None of the laws that they've come up with, their little rules and mandates make sense. Their mandates have been way out of control, and we need to go back to freedom.
They want the government to end vaccination checks at the US-Canada border. They're also demanding an end to social restrictions and mask mandates in public spaces. Some say Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has violated his oath of office and are calling for his resignation. Besides paralysing daily life in the city, the protesters also temporarily blocked the Ambassador Bridge, the country's main artery for cross-border trade and travel. That's drawn a sharp response from the government. Prime Minister Trudeau has accused them of jeopardising the economy and democracy, and authorities are trying to choke their funding to force an end to the sit-in.
We went after the funding. Our efforts combined with the city's efforts eliminated the GoFundMe. $10 million are no longer accessible to the demonstrators. There are other funding avenues that we continue to aggressively go after.
Despite arrests, fuel shortages and the harsh weather, the convoy says it's not backing down. And similar protests are cropping up in other parts of the country, threatening to derail business activity just as the economy begins to recover from the pandemic. Daniel Padwick, TRT World.
Well, the blockade is threatening to cause an estimated $300 million in losses to the wider Canadian economy, with 3 car plants halting production and critical border crossings brought to a standstill. Goods worth more than $525 billion were traded between the United States and Canada last year. More than half of these shipments were delivered by road, which means trucks carrying products worth nearly $1.5 billion across the border each day. There are 119 border crossings between the two countries, but more than a quarter of this traffic flows through the Ambassador Bridge alone. That's the same route that protesters temporarily blockaded on Tuesday. Well, let's get more on this now with Moshe Lander, a senior lecturer of economics at the Concordia University. He joins us now from Montreal in Canada. Welcome to the program, Moshe. The main routes that handle the country's main steel, aluminium and other parts that keep car factories running on both sides of the US-Canada border were essentially shut down on Wednesday and Thursday. Can you tell us more about the impact that this blockade is having on the auto sector and on the Canadian economy more generally?
Yeah, the bridge that connects Windsor, Ontario to Detroit in the US is a major route for probably close to about $1 billion Canadian a day in goods passing over. The auto sector, of course, is based out of Michigan and around Detroit. And on the Ontario side, there is a major highway that runs all the way from the US border up to the Quebec border. And there's auto factories just lining the highway there. Parts cross back and forth in the manufacture of cars, and it's a very integrated sort of industry. When they're blocking that route, it's impossible to get cars manufactured on either side of the border then. They both rely on each other, and that's going to cause a huge amount of damage the longer that this is allowed to continue.
Now, we know these protests began against a Canadian government vaccine mandate that forced drivers coming from the United States to have the COVID-19 vaccine. But we know the protest has since grown to include demonstrations against the government's various other pandemic restrictions. Can you tell us more about them and what have they done to the country as a whole? Do you think they've been needed to keep the pandemic under control in Canada?
You know, I think it's one of the things that people are just kind of frustrated with 2 years of frustration. A lot of pandemic rules are based at the provincial level, not at the federal level. And so the government in Ottawa has very little control over what each individual province does. Some provinces, like here where I am in Quebec, have some of the most restrictive laws, curfews, lockdowns, having to wear masks in public, social distancing. Provinces like Alberta, which is out in Canadian West, are much more relaxed and we're much slower to impose any sorts of restrictions. So, you know, to kind of target the government, I think it's just more kind of a frustration that everybody's had, and you need somewhere to target that frustration, and it's the federal government. It's weak here in Canada. It's a minority government. It wasn't popular to begin with, and so I think it's just kind of an easy way to point out, you know, where people are frustrated.
And just leaving the blockade behind for a second, can you explain to us how the Canadian economy has been faring now that the vaccine rollout has picked up? I believe around 80% of Canadians are now fully vaccinated, 50% have had a third booster shot. Has that helped the Canadian economy recover?
Yeah, I mean, we're really tied to the US. They're our biggest trade partner. And of course, their economy is about 10 times to 12 times our size. So, you know, the old phrase is that if, you know, the US sneezes, we catch a cold here in Canada. So we're really integrated with them. As they recover, so do we. The fact is, like you said, because we're kind of reaching that point where almost everybody has two vaccines, boosters are being rolled out, we're starting to see that some of those restrictions are being lifted. The curfews have been lifted. We have vaccine passports where to get into stores, you have a QR code that scans your way in and allows you to basically function almost in a pre-pandemic sort of way. So we're getting there, but of course it's based on global events as well. A new variant comes along, or it's seen that maybe the vaccines require a second boost or something like that. And we could easily find ourselves back in a situation where the economy is much weaker than it's strengthening to now.
And of course, this blockade certainly isn't helping that economic recovery. Moshe Lander, thanks again for joining us on the program.
Anytime.